Welcome to this week's edition of the Belau Report. I'm Jane Belau. Our guest this week is the leading Republican candidate so far from the precinct caucuses of the Republican Party for governor. And he's with a number of his counterparts who are all going to run for the primary. And they're in Rochester for a forum, but we're fortunate to have Scott Jensen, Dr. Jensen, with us. And thank you for taking time out today before your big forum to come and visit with us.
Thank you, Jane. It's a privilege to be here. I've heard much about you.
Yeah, well, don't believe it all.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Biggest issue, why did you decide to run for governor? Now, you served in the Minnesota Senate, and you started out on your school board, right? And how about the House? Did you serve in the House?
I did not. I served in the school board in Waconia for 10 years, from the mid-90s to about 2005. And then I served one term in the Senate from 2017 to 2020. And I thought I was done with politics. I'm not crazy about the way it operates. I don't think it's focused enough on solving problems. I think there's too much posturing, too much pandering. I don't think there's enough intellectual curiosity. I think that elected officials should be courageous and should lead conversations, even if those conversations are risky. If we can't lead those conversations, how are we going to possibly get on the same page? So when I said I wasn't going to run for re-election to the Senate, I thought that I was done with politics. But two things happened. First, my wife had 4 major surgeries that she had to have done in about a year and a half. And she came through each of those 4 major surgeries better than the last. So that one morning we were having coffee and she said, "Scott, I haven't felt this good in a decade." She'd had a tumor removed from her head. She'd had her neck fused at 4, 5, 6, 7 levels. She'd had a new shoulder. She'd had a new knee, and she was doing terrific. At the same time, COVID-19 struck. And with the COVID-19, I was an outspoken skeptic of some of the things that we were doing. I protested that the way we completed death certificates was being changed from the preceding 17 years. And I said, if a person's dying of stage 4 colon cancer and is on hospice, but in their last day or two of life, they happen to test positive with a PCR test for COVID, that person still died of colon cancer. And I thought that my comments would be received constructively, and they were not. And 2 or 3 months later, my license was being investigated for the first time in my life.
Wow. Huh. But you're right. I think a lot of the numbers were inflated by people dying of other things, don't you think?
I think we have data that shows that at different times during the pandemic, sometimes the numbers were undercounted, sometimes they were overcounted. We knew that when we were saying that we had 1,000 cases of COVID-19, that there was probably many more than that. We always talked about what would the conversion factor be, because for every person you were diagnosing, there may well have been 8 people with a similar syndrome that didn't get checked out. So I think in those situations, you would have had undercounting. But when you encourage the use of COVID-19 on a death certificate, then you might have overcounting. And I think in the hospitals, we saw an inclination towards using the diagnosis of COVID-19 sort of casually, and the inducements to do so were monetary. So I think that there was a risk of having more hospitalizations being attributed to COVID than maybe were real. I think even Dr. Tony Fauci said a few months ago, he said, well, if a person comes into a children's hospital with a broken leg, and as a matter of policy, they're checked with a PCR test, and the PCR test is positive, that should not be counted as a COVID hospitalization. It should be counted as a broken leg hospitalization. So I think that honestly, we've got sort of goulash for data. And I think it's going to take us some significant effort to sort it all out.
Amazing. I know one of the criticisms in one of the emails from the governor's office said there was misinformation spread by his opponent. And what is he talking about?
Well, I think the accusation of misinformation is bantered around pretty casually. I think if you think someone has been spreading misinformation, you should say, this is what you said and it wasn't true. But that's not what they're doing. We're just accusing one another of misinformation. The other day, the CDC director, Walensky, said that Pfizer never told the CDC that their vaccination might not be effective against some of the variants. All right. Was there some misinformation there? We saw the Surgeon General say that he is going to go on a manhunt to find all those people who spread misinformation. And he was telling big tech, you've got to turn over the names of the people who spread misinformation. But at the same time frame, we had the Surgeon General of Florida say, we're going to defy the CDC and recommend that kids not get vaccinated against COVID-19. So where in that mumbo jumbo is the misinformation? If one person's lie is another person's truth, how do you sort it out?
Oh, my. Well, what would you say about how we have handled the pandemic in the state of Minnesota?
I would give the grade about a D. I think that in the first few weeks, I think every Minnesotan wanted to play their part. We absolutely recognize that trying to flatten the curve so that our healthcare facilities would not be overwhelmed was a good thing. But relatively quickly, we recognized that there were decisions that were being made that were political rather than public health. Deciding that this industry was essential and this one wasn't. Being told that you could buy a hammer at this big box Home Depot store, but you couldn't buy it at the local hardware store that might have had 4 customers come in all day long. That just didn't jive with a lot of Minnesotans. I think at that point in time, what we saw happen was we saw a loss of transparency. We saw models that said there's going to be 75,000 people die in Minnesota in some near time frame if we don't do this, this, and this. Well, that never happened. We saw lockdowns. We saw patients discharged from the hospital not being determined whether or not they were still infectious with COVID-19. And they were discharged back to the nursing home they came from. And the nursing homes weren't allowed to check first to make sure that the person coming back wasn't still infectious. So we ended up having an incredible outbreak in so many nursing homes. People died. And the response was, let's lock the nursing homes down. Let's lock the families out. So we made people die alone. And I think when I've asked my patients through my 4 decades of taking care of them, I think the last thing any of us want to do is die alone. We want to have someone there holding our hand, making certain that we're not air hungry, in pain, losing our dignity because of bowel or bladder. And yet we did that to thousands of people. I think those are mistakes. We bought a building for $7 million to store bodies, and it never saw a body. We saw modeling data not shared with the public. We saw immunity sort of thrown aside and said there is no such thing as natural immunity, and yet we all know there's a natural immunity. So I think there were plenty of mistakes made. We could have done better. I think one size doesn't fit all. We had northwestern Minnesota, Kitson County, with either 0 or 1 or 2 cases being treated like Hennepin County, where they had thousands of cases. That wasn't responsible decision making. We have to learn, Jane, this is going to happen again. We'll have another pandemic. And when it does, I think we have to pull together now and decide how are we going to do it better next time. We had 15 to 20 years of data that we had decided from 2002 to 2020 how we would respond to a pandemic. And it was literally thrown out the window within months of this pandemic starting. That wasn't responsible decision making.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Biggest issue facing the governor of the state of Minnesota.
The governor of Minnesota has to gain back the trust of Minnesotans, and that's going to be very difficult. I think a lot of folks have lost faith in him because they feel that every dollar he gets his hands on, he'll spend. He talks about this $10 billion surplus as a surplus, but it's not a surplus, it's an overtax. He has said there would not be mandates, but then he helped with mandates. So I think trust is going to be Governor Walz's biggest issue. For me, as a candidate running to give him an early retirement plan, I would say the big three issues are, I need to assure Minnesotans that we're going to get public safety back, that we are going to have student choice, and we're going to stop funding broken institutions. We're going to fund kids, and we're going to help kids have more choices. We've sort of narrowed the focus. If you don't learn off of a computer, you're going to struggle. When I was a kid going to school, you could do hands-on learning, auto mechanics, industrial arts, home economics. When we got rid of some of those programs, we were taking away kids' opportunities to flourish, succeed, demonstrate that they can do something good. That's important for kids, to do something well. I don't care if it's tiddlywinks or getting an A on an exam. If you can get a little taste of doing something well, you want to do something else well too. So I think schools is a big deal. I think we need to make sure that Minnesotans can feel good about our elections. So I think we need to have photo ID. I think 46 out of 47 countries in Europe use that. I think we should join them. And then I think public safety. And public safety, it isn't going to happen unless we also elevate our Second Amendment rights and make sure that we put more cops on the street, we give individuals the opportunity to stand your ground in constitutional carry, and we need to make sure that incarceration is used as a tool to let felons know, if you commit these crimes, you are going to spend some significant time.
Yeah. That involves major reform, doesn't it? All the way to where the campaigns go and the candidates. I mean, it's not just the governor, it's the governor and the attorney general and all the people.
I think you're absolutely right, Jane. And I think one of the fascinating things is that, granted, I'm not much of a politician, I just did one term, but I have been so impressed by the number of people that are engaging, the number of mama bears and papa bears and grandmas and grandpas that are saying, we don't want that going on in our schools, or we want this, or we want this. People are getting off the sidelines and they're saying, we may have been complacent before, but we're not going to be complacent again. We're going to get involved. Teddy Roosevelt said, we need to honor the people that are willing to get out of the seats, the spectator seats, and get into the arena and get bruised and bullied and bloodied. And I think that's what's happening. Minnesotans and Americans across the land are saying, we're going to get involved. We have more people running for city councils, school boards, township supervisors, House of Representatives, Senate. People are absolutely fired up. We know that this is not the America, this is not the Minnesota that we grew up with.
Good, good. All right. School choice is something that parents want and everybody, but maybe one of the big unions doesn't want it. But how can you accomplish that without a legislature that's willing to help you?
I think you're absolutely right, Jane. If a governor wants to go it alone without legislative support in something like that, it's going to be pretty tough pickings. I think you could draw a line in the sand and try to force the hand. But I'm confident that if we demonstrate what we're trying to do, this is not about teachers and teachers' unions. This is about kids. And one size doesn't fit all. I think an awful lot of people, Republicans, Democrats, teachers, parents, I think we recognize it. Not every kid flourishes in the same way. we need to provide different ways to learn. We've sort of been stuck. The last two really big ideas in public education were really pushed forward by a Democratic governor, Rudy Perpich, in the 1980s. He pushed forward post-secondary enrollment options. So if you were bored and really weren't flourishing, you could take your junior and senior year and go to a college and start your college career and continue to stimulate your mind. And the other one was open enrollment, so that if this district wasn't working for you, maybe this one would be a better fit. I had a patient in several months ago, and I asked him, you're doing really well. You're 25 years old and you've got a good job. How did you get to this place? And he told me, he looked me straight in the eye and he said, Doc, I was one of the dumbest kids in my class. I was third from the bottom. And he said, I hated school and I hated my classmates. And I said, what did you do? And he said, I was going into my junior year and my parents and I sat down and we decided that I needed to change school districts. So he changed school districts and he went to a school district that had less of an emphasis on sports and more of an emphasis on hands-on learning. So he did industrial arts with woodworking and metal. He did auto mechanics, and he really taught his hands and his brain how to do these things together. And he became an excellent auto mechanic with a very good paying job, running different people in a department. His life changed because he was able to change school districts. Hats off to Governor Rudy Perpich.
Yeah.
We need to think big. We should not play small ball. This has got to be about big stuff because kids are struggling. Not every kid should be going to college. We should be encouraging kids to go into the trades. We should be encouraging kids to take a year off if they're not sure and just work. My own traveling to dental school and the seminary and medical school, it was a pretty circuitous path. I was lucky that I was able to do that. Not every kid gets that chance. We need to make sure kids have a bigger menu to choose from.
And that is one of the big problems facing the country, as well as Minnesota, are actually trained employees. And finding people for all these jobs is really going to be tremendous. Makes you wonder, how about going back to the way it was when you had a vocational school and you had steam fitters and trained electricians.
I think you're absolutely right, Jane. I think that's exactly where we have to go. And I think being a steam fitter, electrician, I think this level of education is much more demanding than it might have been 50 years ago when I was graduating from high school. But I think that we have to commit ourselves to that. And I think parents want that. I think teachers want that. And we can do that without blowing up our K through 12 education publicly. I mean, we've got to rebuild it, to be sure. But America does better if we have a strong public education system. Sometimes I think people forget why we have compulsory education. We didn't do that so that we could all sit around in a circle and sing Kumbaya. We did it because we were selfish. We knew that if we had an educated citizenry that could read and write and do some math, that we would have a stronger country. We would have people that could dream dreams. They could start their own business. They could run the numbers. They could do the bookwork. They could run a ledger. We did that because we thought that's important to be a strong, free country. And we've lost our way.
All right, you mentioned public safety as one of the three major issues. And how do we recruit people to be public safety officials again after the last few years of the defund the police and the attitudes toward reforming, and what do we do about it?
I think we have to do several things. I think we have to create pathways. When I was in high school, I had a chance to, once you got into your sophomore year in high school, you could make some choices. You could take these classes, or you could take these classes, or you could take these classes. And I chose to take a lot of the chemistry and physics and things like that. I think we need to have that same pathway created so that even as perhaps junior high, if young people are interested in possibly being involved in public safety, even if it isn't a full-blown class, let's do an hour or two a week where they can learn a little bit about what does that profession do? What do police women and policemen do? And so we could have people come in from the community. We could teach the basics of first responders from a healthcare perspective, because so many emergencies, healthcare-wise, the first responder on the scene is a policeman or a policewoman. We could tantalize them a little bit and say, there's tremendous opportunity here. This is what it looks like to be a detective. This is what it looks like to be a beat cop, a cop on the beat. We could do so many things, but I think pathways are important. We need to go to the parents and say, how can we help your child not be looking at the cops as the bad guys, but as the good guys? When I was growing up in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, the cops were the good guys. We didn't, I mean, I didn't call them names. My mom and dad said, that's Mr. Michelson, that's Chief Michelson. You treat him with respect when you see him. Mom would say something, go thank him for the work he does. He would be the person that would help us if we got stuck in a ditch. He was also the person that, if he caught me throwing tomatoes at a car, he'd say, Scott, should we go home and talk with your parents about this, or will you stop doing this? So, you know, I think we need to go back in time, but we need to create pathways. We need to talk to parents. We need to talk to police officers and say, you know, how can we fix this? We need to put more cops on the street. But what we need to do to make public safety better is something we also need to do to make our relationships with one another better. We've got to stop being, if you will, vengeful to one another. We shouldn't hold one another in contempt just because we disagree. We've got to enjoy one another more and say, gee, Jane, I don't see it that way. Could you help me understand? Why do you view the world that way? We're not doing that. We become very judgmental. We look at our ancestors and say how stupid they were because they did this and everybody knows they shouldn't have done that. I don't think we should do that. I think we should look at our ancestors and say they lived in a different time. They had a different set of values. They didn't have a cell phone. They didn't have phones. They didn't have this. I think we need to be more charitable in our hearts.
Okay, now you have great ideas, and it's really a pleasure to hear them. How do you translate being the governor into making some of those things happen?
Well, I don't want to come across as naive, and it's easy to do that. Or I could come across like a politician and give you some dodge and weave kind of thing. But it's going to take hard work, and I think it's going to take character. It's going to take a skill set. It's going to take determination. My son and I built a restaurant with some other fellows. It was hard work. To get through that first 3 years without going bankrupt was tough. But we've now been up and running 15 years. We did it through determination. We cleaned the bathrooms. We washed the floors. We did what it took. Yeah. I built a medical clinic 21 years ago. I cleaned the bathrooms at the end of the day. I hired the staff. That's the kind of thing we have to do, is we have to say, we're here, we need to get here, what has to happen? And we have to have people with character and skill sets and determined and say, we're going to get it done. There can be no letting up. We have to get it done. You got to get up early in the morning and stay late at night. And if you're not able to get the amount of work done that needs to get done, then you got to get up earlier and you got to stay up later. Because if we fail, we will at some point in time find that America is not recognizable. We can do it. When I was in the Senate, I had 7 bills as chief author in 2019. And I got every one of those 7 bills passed on the Senate floor. But I also got every one of those 7 bills passed unanimously. Not one Democrat voted against my bills. And one of them was a big-time new statute, new chapter in statute for the pharmacy benefit manager. You're talking Optum, CVS Caremark, and Express Scripts. They didn't like being told that if they wanted to do business in Minnesota, they'd pay hundreds of thousands of dollars of fees in registration and licensing. But we got that done, and we got it passed unanimously. You have to talk with people.
All right, we have 5 minutes left out of this half hour. It tells you how fast time goes. What would be the hallmark of your administration? You listened?
If I'm elected governor and I serve 4 years, I think what you will see is a team around Scott Jensen and Matt Burke that is consisting of young people and older people, black and white, and many other ancestries as well, men and women. You will see commissioners in their 30s. You will see people come from the private sector into the government sector. You will see some government sector people pushed to the top of the line. You will see people around Scott Jensen that are not afraid to say, Scott, you're wrong. That's not going to work. I'm going to surround myself with people that are not afraid to say, Doc, if you do that, you're going to regret it. I do not want to surround myself with yes people. I don't like groupthink. We will have robust conversations. And I think people are going to say, Jensen was fearless. He was transparent, and he didn't give a rip. And I don't need this. People ask me, are you sure you want to be governor? I never said I wanted to be governor. I feel compelled to run for governor. I think the words of Esther 4:14, have you considered you're in the position you're in for such a time as this, speak to my heart.
Okay, I have 3 minutes left for you to address the people who are interested in watching and probably likely voters. And go ahead and tell them what you'd like.
Right now, we've got 7 conservative candidates, and we're saying a lot of the same things about the issues. I think we're all going to say that we spend too much in Minnesota, that we need student choice, that we need public safety, that we need to elevate our Second Amendment rights, that we need to have elections that feel secure, that science shouldn't be subordinated to political science. We're going to all say those kinds of things. I think what matters is we need to recognize that the political class isn't getting it done, that the real heroes of the day are not the elected officials, it's the everyday man and woman who are getting off the sideline saying, I'm going to help. I think it's going to take a collective effort, and all of us are going to have to recognize it. When Ronald Reagan said that freedom is only a generation away from extinction, he wasn't just whistling Dixie. He was telling us what could happen to us, and we're frightened that that's happening now. We need our health freedom. We need to get to choose what we do in our lives. Government needs to be that safety net, not that intrusive force into every aspect of our lives. We need to get along and talk, and we need to not be afraid, because we've done it before, and we can do it again. We can succeed in leading the cause of freedom across the globe. And if we do anything less, we failed.
Okay, how can people communicate with you if they have an idea or some suggestion for you? How do they find you?
drscottjensen.com, DRSCOTTJENSEN.com. And we've tried to be as transparent as possible. We've put all of our issue positions on our website. We want people to communicate, because I want to be as transparent as I can, so that this coming October, when people hear rumors that I have had 10 wives and I've got horns on my forehead, that they know that that's not true.
And I wanted to talk with you about your lieutenant governor, but we're out of time. But you have promised me that he will be happy to come and join us for a half hour, and we'll take you up on that.
Matt Burke is a delightful person with solid character, a strong skill set, and he's a determined individual.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Scott Jensen. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, our viewers, for your interest in Minnesota, its issues, the country, and the world. And we'll be back with you next week, same time, same channel. Have a very good week and have a very good night. Thank you, Scott Jensen.